Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. Today is episode 61, Friday, June 11th, 2021. We're so glad to have you here today. As always, we'll start with our COVID news, COVID Connect. After that, local news. And then my guest for the day, Christine Gibbons of Fusion Coolant Systems. She's going to be talking to us about a bunch of things, including the MedTech aspect of Fusion's work, as well as her history with some notable local startups. After that, it's time for our pitch party. Once again, we're on week 2 of our now quarterly pitch party. After that, Q&A, and as always, if you have announcements of things happening in your world and in our community, please bring them. We'd love to hear from you at that point in the time. So, COVID metrics and vaccine distribution, as always, from covid.cdc.gov. I'm going to share the PDF that CDC has been putting out so well for the last number of months. If you recall back in the day, the folks at COVID Tracking sort of handed the baton over and said, CDC is finally doing what we'd hoped they would do from the beginning. And now we find that in this wonderful, rather long PDF that they publish every week. The change is all good change with COVID in Michigan. A lot of green in this report this week like we've never seen before. The cases down below levels that we have not seen them really since the start of this. It's dropping very low, which even last week we weren't seeing it quite this low. The positivity rate really getting down there, which is wonderful to see. The deaths, also wonderful news here as well. Vaccination summary, we'll sort of skip over here for a minute to get down to this graphic that you'll recall we look at every week. And this also, the 40 to 69-year-old demographic is the one that has really carried this wave, but everything is dropping off, and such great news out of this. Down here, this is the one that, if you recall, we have looked at, and now it's turned into almost like a logbook for us. This transmission level by county. This is the first week where the state is mostly yellow or moderate transmission, one step away from low transmission. But if you recall, in previous months, probably the last 2 to 3 months, Michigan has been absolutely red in terms of community transmission. That's a little reported fact. We've actually been talking with Dr. Philip Levy, who will probably join us in an upcoming week, about what is going on with this. We want to bring some expertise to this, but it sure looks like the community transmission level has actually been exceptionally high for the last 3 months. Again, not very highly reported, but that could explain why we're now seeing certainly what looks like an end to this wave, thankfully with much less impact than prior ones. Obviously, testing is starting to drop off. If you look a month before, that wasn't the case, so doctors are seeing less reason to do the tests. And if we scroll down here to the national picture for vaccinations, it's good news. Michigan is still about in the middle of the country for vaccinations. And the numbers are just continue to climb, although as we'll see down here, the weekly vaccinations not climbing. The overall rate there dropping off as we continue down. We're back to levels that we haven't seen since January. So we certainly have passed the peak on that. And in terms of the national picture of county-wide transmission that I want to take you down to, actually, before we get there, here's hospital admissions. We sadly, for 2 to 3 months, had to report that Michigan was dead last in the country in terms of hospital admissions. Now we get to say we're 46th, which is definitely coming up in the list. Kentucky, Wyoming, Colorado, and others leading in a negative way the hospital admissions, although not at a dramatically red level. So generally good news across the country here. Here's the picture of community transmission once again. A lot of places that had been red are now into the yellow zone. You can see that either on the left or on the right of this graphic. If there's much red, it really seems to be around West Virginia and in parts of the Rockies, which is kind of interesting. So that's where we are with COVID these days. Great news for Michigan. And we look forward to that continuing, hopefully, in that direction. Let's go back to our local news. We're going to take a look at some things that are happening locally. First of all, Intubeing is still seeking an embedded systems developer, microcontroller firmware design, and user interface software development and system design. If you like doing electromechanical design with a focus on software, we would love to talk to you. Also, look on the website for FDA education modules. Whenever we do an FDA education module on the show, and actually any guest that we have on the show, you can go under MedTech Crossroads, under webinars, and you can find all of those sessions and you can use them. We've had a lot of people say they like using the FDA education for mentoring, because if they want to talk about a topic like quality systems or design controls or what are user needs, they can go and point them right to the website, which is really cool. Tell you a little bit about A2 Biosocial that happened just the other night. There was a thunderstorm coming through, but they made it happen. They navigated around the rain. A2 Biosocial is a monthly gathering run by Matthew Himes, supported by MishBio, Ann Arbor Spark, and MyLead. And they do a great job of getting people together. We're hoping for the day to come again when we can, have 100 people in the basement of Pretzel Bell, which was one of the last live ones that happened. But a couple pictures from the other nights. Intubeing provided the drink holders for the evening, and Matthew did a great job of getting people together once again. So thank you, Matthew, for that. MishBio is doing some cool stuff. They just did the Michigan Forum for Digital Health on June 9th with some great folks coming to that. This next week, the Michigan Medical Device Summit. And they're going to have some folks from FDA at that, Kim Troutman and Kevin Fu, an action-packed agenda from, I believe it's 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon on June 16th. So not to be missed, I will be there. Hope to see you there. Hopefully we can have Steve Rapundelow come on at some point afterwards and tell us all about these events that they've had, which have been a great thing. It's great when anytime we can get FDA to Michigan and have them talk about what's going on in their world. And also to remind you, it is the quarterly pitch party. We can't have a pitch competition. It's hard to pick winners and losers, but it really is fun to talk with our judges about what they like and what they don't like. So at the end of the month, we're going to award $2,500 to one lucky participant. And our judges on the last show of the month, we dedicate the entire show to reviewing the pitches that have happened during this previous month. You'll hear one of those today at the end of the show. I'd like to talk about what we liked, what we didn't like, and award a prize at the end. So if you know of startups that are MedTech oriented in the US, they can send their pitch deck to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org to be eligible for selection, either in this or another pitch party. And they need to cover problem statement, vision, value proposition, team, milestones, business model, competitors, and their ask or some functionally equivalent areas. And our judges, as always, will be Andy Rader from M&A Partners, Evergreen M&A Partners, Dr. Nikki Kennedy, founder of Arbor Hive and a vascular surgeon, Jim Metzger, our friend over at Keystone Solutions Group on the west side of the state, and Stacy Frankovich, program manager from MedHealth. So we're looking forward to seeing them on the last show of the month to judge these pitches, one of which you will hear today. So with that, I think that's all of our news for the day. We managed to get the screen sharing off. And it's that wonderful time again when we get to interview a member of our community. My guest today is Christine Gibbons, Chief Administrative Officer of Fusion Coolant Systems. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gene. So good to see you.
So good to see you.
It's an honor to be here.
Oh, we're so glad. You've been such a longtime member of the community, doing startups, mentoring, fundraising, so many amazing things. So we're glad to get a chance to catch up with you and talk about what you're doing now. And I think a lot of people know your name from your time as CEO of Histosonics. And I think we may start there. We're gonna sort of go in a few different places, ending with your current job as a Chief Administrative Officer of Fusion Coolant Systems and what you guys are doing, which really cuts across disciplines and has some cool MedTech aspects to it. But take us back to Histosonics and your time there as CEO. I think a lot of people might need a reminder as to what Histosonics does.
Yep. Well, Histosonics has amazing technology. It uses non-invasive ultrasound therapeutically to be able to basically treat tissue non-invasively with non-ionizing, non-radiating forces. So essentially, you use ultrasound where the beams come together at the focus, inside the body through the tissue into the target, and when it all converges at that target, there's this incredible pressure field that creates a bubble cloud that basically is able to disrupt tissue at the subcellular level. So it's non-invasive surgery, basically. And so we at Histosonics started this with technology from the University of Michigan. A team of 5 founding scientists, including a physician, came together at the university, called it histotrypsy, which is essentially histo tissue, trypsy meaning to disrupt or crush actually. And so coining that phrase histotrypsy, the team basically moved forward to try to put this technology into a commercial setting through the launch of Histosonics, right out of the University of Michigan. So we had 5 founders from the university, 3 management company founders. So the really big founding team, which had some challenges, but also some great rewards. And I actually started out as president and chief operating officer. We had actually a remote CEO at the time, Tom Davison, 40-year veteran in the medical device space, who was a wonderful, in mentoring me. And then also Jim Bertolina, who had a great long career at Stryker, left, the Stryker navigation systems as one of his key roles at Stryker. So he had a ton of knowledge in terms of using navigation systems in a surgical setting. So brought that team together, got launched with the help of bringing a syndicate together of 5 venture funds in the state. We were able to raise $11 million as the Series A round of financing that came out of an EIR project that I did. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that maybe separately. But basically got launched and put head down and started working on developing a device that we could take into obviously a clinical setting. We decided our first application would be benign prostatic hyperplasia, which is basically occurs as men age, the natural overgrowth of prostatic tissue, hyperplastic prostate tissue. And a non-invasive therapy for that type of application was something that we felt was a great first application, although we all recognized platform technology. And our physician was a urologist, so of course he had a keen interest in seeing the technology applied in urology. So took the device development all the way through to the point of taking it to a clinical safety study. We treated 28 men with BPH. It was a safety study, got great safety results. We had very tolerable application of the technology, had some early indicators of efficacy, but what we really didn't get was the real tissue disruption we wanted to see. And so we felt that for long-term efficacy benefits, we really needed to get more tissue effect. And we're faced with the choice of, do we continue with the next iteration of product development, or do we potentially go to a different indication that may have a different changes or challenges with respect to design? And so at that point, we did decide to pivot, which was a tough decision point. But pursued actually solid tumors, with specifically liver tumors being the next indication. And fortunately, the design team was smart enough to do a design that was really modular in nature. So we were able to really take 80% of the device that we had developed for BPH and repurpose it, with the key being, the therapy and imaging aspect of the device being changed out for solid liver tumor. And so took that all the way through clinical studies as well, treated, 8 patients with 11 tumors in a study in Spain with really great results. So super proud of that whole process. And so that's basically a synopsis of about 9 years worth of work to get to that point.
That's amazing, Chris. And I think, the number of people who can say that they've raised $11 million and led a team working at the time on a class 3 product. I mean, one of the, I think you've said that the company is now, it's not considered class 3 at this point for the current application, but to be working on a PMA and to get that all the way from academic research into clinical trials. That's, I mean, there's not a lot of people who can say they've done that, which is amazing. We'll talk about some lessons learned earlier on or later on here, but the thing that started this all, you said it was an EIR project, an entrepreneur in residence, this one out of the University of Michigan, if I recall. And tell us about that, because I think we have a lot of folks who are at that, sometimes they're mentors, sometimes they're seeing projects that are coming out of academic settings. It's very common. Tell us about that program. Also, not every EIR results in an $11 million raise. We should just mention that right off the bat. But tell us about that program and how you got started with this.
Super fortunate at the time, the Michigan Venture Capital Association actually had a program to sponsor EIRs. And so the idea was to really retain talent and opportunity, technology in the state. So that was the kind of the higher order objective from the state's funding of it. So through the MVCA and a program from the state of Michigan, they were looking to keep folks in the state that had entrepreneurial experience. And so I actually had just finished up another startup. It was Sensicor. It was an Ardesta funded project or a startup that was sold to GE, a division of GE. And so I was looking for my next opportunity. Relationships, are such a key part of any kind of venture. And so I'd known Jim Addix for a long time in the entrepreneurial community in Michigan. And interestingly, I'd also done my very first startup with John Knight, his partner out of Wisconsin. He had actually invested in Synthon, which was a technology out of Michigan State. So in having known both of these guys from venture investors, we said, hey, why don't we go after this MBCA program and look to partner, try to find, something that we could basically launch and retain in the state and it was great because they, had sort of an already committed funding source to be able to then look to launch technology and get an opportunity off the ground. So it was wonderful because the venture investors team was very open to letting me into their kind of inside baseball approach to looking at deals. Was able to sit through a lot of investment advisory committee meetings, and so I could really see how they pitched internally and pitched to their advisors, how they structured a deal, how the deal is vetted internally, what the key metrics for being able to launch a deal was. And so then, looking at the various opportunities, seeing the opportunity with Histosonics, and ultimately coming to the point where I thought, I want in on this deal, turning my hat from EIR to then being a histo person, and then pitching it knowing, kind of what the key metrics would be as measured by them as a venture group. So wonderful opportunity, and it allowed us to really bring a great syndicate of investors together and get it launched. And I mean, it was happening late 2008, into late 2009 when, basically markets were in free fall and there was all kinds of, challenges in the economy. So it took a little bit longer, I'd say, but that allowed us the time to really refine, I think, the business plan, team planning, and a lot of the product development pathway.
It strikes me wonderful. That your approach to that EIR process was very, very intentional. I think sometimes mentor programs can struggle with this idea of, we'll take somebody and put them in this place and hopefully something comes out. It strikes me that this was very much we know where the money would be coming from for this, and if we can find that opportunity, there's a lot of intentionality to it. In your time as I guess it's not really a mentor, but an entrepreneur in residence, where I think you were mentoring people as well, as you looked at opportunities, and we were just talking about this on the show the other day. We had our judges back on, our pitch party judges, and we gave them an hour a couple weeks ago to say, what do you not like when you see a startup pitch? Like, not specifically about any given startup pitch, but what do you not like? And so maybe I have the same question for you. In those days when you were looking at those opportunities as an EIR, which then turned into this wonderful thing with Histosonics, what were you looking at? Like, what made you go, oh, this could be an opportunity, and what made you go, oh, yeah, I'm done looking at that one, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a lot of the things that are pretty obvious. In terms of team is such a key part. Team, technology, and unmet. I mean, looking at medical specifically, unmet clinical needs or unmet market opportunities. I think are the big areas. And being able to, I'll use Histosonics as an example. I think being able to really test out the market opportunity took a lot of interviews with clinicians to really validate that, what the team saw, the technology was, they had this great vision for where to take the technology, but saying, if we can get that there, we will see adoption from the clinical community. And interestingly, one of the physicians that I spoke with is now the chief medical officer of Histosonics. And so you kind of come full circle and say, here is this guy that was actually a big fan of the technology from way back when. I spoke with him, as part of my diligence process. We kept in touch, and he's been a big, like I said, big fan of technology. And so now he's actually retired from J&J and is able to join the company as their chief medical officer is his title. But really having, so stepping back from a generic perspective, I think looking at, is the team solid? Do they understand where there's gaps? Do they understand where their strengths are and what their appropriate role is going to be? Sometimes you have these phenomenal technologists from a university setting, but they don't have the business acumen to really lead, a startup and be able to take it to a commercial pathway. So making sure that they understand, where their strengths are and where they may need to supplement from a team's perspective, but then also just saying, hey, is this a technology and chasing an opportunity, or chasing an opportunity, or is there truly market pull that we can validate through conversations with, folks in the clinical community? So those, I think, were some key areas where we really dug in to be able to try to separate the truly good opportunities from those we thought maybe they either need a little bit more time to bake a little bit longer, or develop, actually create some data. I think when you look at different venture funds and their stages of willingness to jump in, some may be more willing to jump in earlier where there's just an idea and a concept or maybe a prototype. I'd say that in this case, a lot of venture investors, they wanted to see data, whether it be a preclinical model or something that would show that there is, something that could validate that what they're saying technologically is for real. So data and people and really market validation.
And really go digging for those and find them. Yeah, that's good.
And triangulate them, right? Try to triangulate, with papers and people, and just to try to talk to lots of folks from different angles.
That's an interesting point, Chris, and I'm not sure that we've explicitly had anyone ever bring it up quite that way, because we talk sometimes about, okay, we need to validate this, we need to know if there's a need here, as opposed to a technology chasing an idea or chasing a market. But what you just said, to triangulate, that's a really interesting point, because what I hear you saying in that is it's not enough to go, somebody said that this matters, right? Or we got this data point over here. You really want to then stack those data points up together and say this and this and this, they all agree that this thing matters in this way, that it needs to matter to us to make this a viable company. So that concept of triangulation, I'm not sure has ever been verbalized in our discussions on the show. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thanks for actually acknowledging that, because I do think that that's important, because I think that you may find some people where there are academic papers that would support your hypothesis, but until you actually triangulate with somebody that it's really going to make a difference, the academic community might be, saying yay, but the commercial community might saying, so what? So I think that's part of my point. So
yeah, no, it's such a good point, and we've been in situations before in our own development work, and these are all lessons that you take, and then you kind of go, yep, okay, I'm going to remember that for the future. But places where you'll have a really, really zealous clinician, for example, saying, this is going to work this way, it's going to be great, trust me. And in theory, if you jump to the market would say, yeah, this would be good. And then you come down to questions like usability, for example, which is something we talk about a lot. And you find that, oh, well, actually, this one clinician seems to be the only person who would use this thing this way. So while the market wants it, right, and this clinician wants it in this way, we haven't, to use your term, we haven't triangulated to say, would your peers use it this way? And so that's just a great, that's going to go in our terminology from here on out, Chris Gibbons triangulation rule. I love it. Well, speaking of lessons learned, so and we've all got these. When you think of working with, I guess in this case, particularly MedTech startups, your current endeavor with Fusion Coolant Systems is um, cross-disciplinary. You've got lots of applications. We're going to talk in a bit about some of the MedTech applications of that, which I think are really cool for bioburden reduction. When we think about MedTech more broadly, um, and when you and I talked before, you mentioned one of the lessons learned being thinking about preclinical models. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by that.
Yeah, as I said, we had some challenges when we ultimately got to the clinic for the BPH application. And in retrospect, had we learned a little bit sooner about the variability of male anatomy, I think we may have potentially, changed our design constraints. And so, there's lots of information out in the public domain about, the pelvic anatomy of women in terms of childbirth and trying to understand the dynamics in reproductive medicine. But when it comes to male anatomy, we tried to look for papers. We did cadaveric studies. We did a lot with CT imaging, that type of thing, and truly trying to understand basically, our device was treating non-invasively through the perineum, and so basically you have this pelvic cavity that we had to contend with, which is bone and, bone and air, bone and air stop sound. And so our ability to overcome this bony pelvis, was one of our design constraints in terms of how much energy we needed to deliver to reach the prostate and get enough energy at the focus. And so, we, again, did all kinds of work in terms of some preclinical models and come to find out in an actual clinical setting, there is a lot of variability in terms of where the prostate is seated in the pelvic cavity. And so if it's really far back from the perineum, that's a lot more, distance to travel to get to the focus, as well as more potential for bony blockage. And so we had actually done a healthy volunteer study, in preparation for our clinical work, and saw this variability, but we also had the challenge that folks weren't anesthetized. Is that going to make a difference? And there's all these variables that we were trying to balance in terms of understanding whether or not this would or wouldn't be a problem. And in the end, it was a challenge. There were some design changes that could have been made, but as I said, we were faced with this: should we continue down another iteration or try a different application? So I would say, lessons learned is, understand as soon as possible some of these anatomic variations, so that in the design process, those can be taken into consideration, such that, had we been able to factor that in, we would have, made some design changes probably sooner.
I so resonate with that. I mean, we've discovered similar things like that in our work, and just sometimes one that many people don't know is that the electrical impedance of male and female bodies is different. And boy, you sure scratch your head until the first time you discover that little tidbit.
Very interesting.
Well, this will cut this person, but it won't cut that person. What on earth is going on here? And many times FDA is also interested in these models, right? Because we don't want to use animals, but oftentimes animal models are one of the ways that is necessary. And then you try to do bench models, and then the FDA asks you, how have you validated this model? And it opens up a huge can of worms that sort of crosses the lines between actual engineering and the research science, and it becomes a very, very challenging problem. So I think just to have that on people's radar, that you think, I've got this model and I wrote papers about this model, that's great. That doesn't necessarily cut it for the real world. It's a really important point. Now your system is, or the Histosonic system that you worked on was that was one that you obviously needed human trials. Not every device needs human trials, but that's something you had some perceptions about in terms of human use.
In terms of the BPH study or the liver application?
Well, I guess I remember you mentioning sort of a growth lesson of doing studies earlier in the process.
Right. So that's, I guess, what I was thinking was that if we would have done some more healthy volunteer work, to be able to understand that anatomic variation sooner, I think that would have been very helpful, because we did, obviously we did ultimately take this into a therapy, a trial where we were actually applying therapy, but that was already obviously after all of our design was complete, and the the expected amount of bony blockage was already built into our design constraints. So had we done a little bit more work, maybe in human subjects prior to that, I think we would have learned or maybe adjusted our design sooner.
No, this is also good advice, right? Like if you know there's a test you're going to need to do, the earlier that can happen. That's great lessons learned. One of the things,
and I will say we did.
Oh.
I think we learned from that and actually did quite a bit of, as much as we could, healthy volunteer work in the liver application. So happy to say that we already had applied those lessons learned in the next indication, and and obviously not wanting to repeat the challenges of what we learned from our lessons and apply. We actually did do that in our liver application. So it was good.
Well, and it's phenomenal to be able to apply those. It's also, I think, a challenge for many startups to know when is the right time. It's a constant wrestling, and it's different on a startup by startup basis. And you sort of have to discover it, because to take a device too early to a really expensive human trial is a complete waste of time and money. And yet to, keep doing bench testing that doesn't apply to what you're going to end up doing without going to that human model is also an error. So it's like it's kind of a ditch on both sides, and you have to navigate your way down the middle of that. And it sounds like you guys made those course corrections as time went on, which is awesome. Well, here's one of the questions that people are often asking folks who've walked the path before, as you have, Chris. What about the FDA? And I get to ask you that question with the addition of, this is a PMA you guys were working on. This is a pre-market approval of Class 3. What was your impression of the agency and the interactions that your company had with them?
Well, I think that working with the FDA was a very positive experience. I think that we were very fortunate that the FDA actually had a group that was the ultrasonics group. And so they were very knowledgeable about ultrasound in general, and we're very eager and willing to learn about histotrypsy, which is variation on what they had as an understanding, which was more of a heat-based therapy. We were doing this with non-heat ultrasonic, mechanical forces to disrupt tissue. So there's an education that was necessary, but there's a great foundation with this ultrasonics group in terms of their desire to learn about histotrypsy. So it was a very positive experience. We also had the good fortune that the former commissioner of the FDA was on our board. And so
Oops, we did lose your audio there. Something happened there. Let's see. Did we just switch devices? Lost the cell phone connection.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. What a quick fix.
Sorry about that.
Add technical support to your long list of great qualifications already.
Apologies for that.
No worries.
So we had the former commissioner of the FDA that was, giving us guidance, was able to really help us navigate, when to talk to the FDA, when to do more prep, because I think it's a really fine balance between going too early and going too late. I mean, obviously you want to be able to have as much data as possible so that you can present to the FDA your hypothesis of what clinical trials would look like, what preclinical work should look like, and be able to really with confidence present to them your plan. But you don't want to be so far down the path of preparing all that work and have them redirect you and have to redo that work. So constant balance of timing in terms of when to reach out to them. And so we did get some great advice from our board member, but then also consultants as well. I think that I think there's oftentimes you want to make sure that you have a very current set of feedback from consultants who maybe have a better sense of, the current mood of the FDA, what technologies are, hot, what technologies may have some bad rap. And so, so having a good consulting firm also help us navigate that process was really helpful. So we had a very positive experience. We actually, I think, when we talked to the FDA about basically putting a pause on BPH, we got so much great feedback from our key point of contact there in terms of really encouraging us to continue to pursue applications, whether it be, for prostate indications or else otherwise, just because he saw the work that was done, thought it was very high quality. The integrity of our communications was really, I think, well recognized, being able to be forthright with them, explain to them when we had challenges. And so it was all very, very positive. And, we tried to make sure we had several touch points along the way so that we didn't, like I said, go down blind alleys that needed to be double down, double back when it came to, the feedback piece.
That's great feedback, and I know, I happen to know that from the quality of your leadership and also of the technical abilities of your team that we got to know over the years, the good experience with FDA is partly earned by the company. So that's a feather in all of your caps. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about fusion coolant systems and what you're doing now, which it's really interesting because we talk often about biocompatibility and bioburden, and it's often one of the gotchas. And so you guys deal with a lot of different industries in terms of what fusion does. But there's also a really cool MedTech link here that I don't want to miss as well. But I'd love it if you'd give us a running start into what the company does and where it's going.
Sure. So came to learn that there is actually a fourth state of matter. It's not just solid, liquid, and gas, but there's also this state called supercritical, which is in the case of, say, CO2, it's when has the properties of both liquid and gas. So it's got the density of a liquid, but actually fills the space like a gas. And so when you heat and compress CO2, it becomes supercritical. And so again, a University of Michigan technology spun out into fusion. Dr. Steve Skurlos is on faculty at U of M. And so he discovered or had this aha moment that supercritical CO2 may be best applied in a machining industry where it could be used as a coolant and a lubricant, and it could potentially replace conventional cutting fluids that are messy. And, once they get vaporized, workers breathe this stuff, and it's just hazardous to machinists' health. And so ta-da, we've got, this ability to have this very clean, environmentally friendly metalworking fluid. And kind of fast forward to some of the indications, we actually had what I'll call an integrator. This is somebody who basically tries to solve problems for their customers. And he had a customer who was a medical device manufacturer so he brought to them a machining center, basically a mill, and tools, the tool part that would actually cut the metal, and a part that was actually a 3D printed part that had a lot of porosity because it's going to be an implant, but still needed some post 3D printing machining for final form. And so the challenge, anything we do that would introduce, some sort of metalworking fluid is going to create, biofilm or dirtiness to this part that was very much undesired. So he actually found us, our website, and saw that we could actually use supercritical CO2, machine this part completely dry, and actually the part come out after this machining process cleaner than when it went in. And so we were able to bring supercritical CO2 to this medical device manufacturer's basically impossible challenge of how do I machine this conventionally and still come out with a clean part. And so we now have several medical device companies that are using what we call pure cut, which is basically applying supercritical CO2 in this machining environment as a great enabling technology in the medical device space. We also, are able to sometimes extend tool life and get better quality parts, like in an aerospace application, or really make things go faster, which is of interest in the automotive sector. So there are different value propositions depending upon the industry, but the medical device this was truly enabling and made a clean part when all was said and done by using supercritical CO2.
And we've got a video here in just a second we'll show, but even before this conversation, Chris, I had not realized that case study was using, like you said, a printed, like probably a selective laser sintered part, and you described it as an impossible situation. I mean, it really is. For those who are listening, I mean, if you have to wash a part, it's hard enough to wash a part and then guarantee that you got everything off. It's a nightmare, the situations we've seen like that. And then you take one that's porous, and when you all see this video, I mean, you'll get why. If you put a sponge in what you're about to see, and then try to clean it afterwards. Just imagine that. Is this a good time to share the video?
That'd be great. Please do.
Okay, here we go. So take us through this.
Okay, so on the left, you have conventional cutting fluid, basically machining. These are both the same parts being machined. They're just being videoed at a different vantage point. So you can see here, well, you can't see because it's got all of the basically the effluent all over the place. But the tool is actually now being changed out, and it's going a little bit slow on my side. But so now you've picked up another tool, and now you're doing another machining operation, and you've got all of this basically coolant and lubricant, together in an emulsion that's basically keeping the part cool while you are milling it. But obviously it's a mess. And this is actually not as messy as other operations that I've seen. And so now on the right, if you want to play that video, you can see now, so that just that little vapor is the CO2 coming into atmosphere. It's also turning that same part. You can see the part there. It's selecting a different tool, changing out the tool here, getting ready to do the secondary operation. And so it's going to grab a different tool and then now apply supercritical CO2 to basically do this completely dry with CO2 as its coolant and lubricant. Much cleaner, obviously. All of those metal chips are flying away quite nicely, and the part's clean.
That's an incredible solution. I seem to recall that back in the day when our friend Jen Baird was doing Accuray cytometers, that they were actually addressing, the original thing was to look at the bioburden in the machining fluid. I know it went on from there to cytometry and such, but it's a long-standing problem how messy these solutions are.
Interesting story. Jen Baird and Steve Skurlos were both part of the co-founding team at Accuray Cytometry. So Steve, this has been part of Steve's life's work. And so it's really, it is a very small community. And so that's why he was originally involved in Accuray Cytometry too, is, for that reason.
Well, little known fact that way back in the day when I was a student at University of Michigan, he was my senior design instructor. So you can say hi to Steve for me and tell him that you just got interviewed by the guy who built the guitar. He'll know what I meant. So.
Okay, perfect. I love it.
Chris, this is great. I'm going to just open it up really quickly for questions. If anybody has any thoughts or questions for Chris, we'd love to hear your Q&A. Oh, there's a few down there that I already missed in the thing. From Francis, does Fusion provide kits that install on the milling center? How do you provide a service like this?
Yeah, so we have essentially, like I said, what we do is we heat and compress the CO2, and so we actually have a box that has all of the componentry to do that heating and pressurization. And so that box itself gets integrated into a machine tool. It's actually mounted on the machine tool, or it could be on a stand. But then we adapt into the mill or the drill, the machining center, to be able to then bring the CO2 through the machine tool to be able to then, through the Fusion, we call it our pure cut box. And so that is, I guess it's a kit, to Francis's question, where we're basically doing an adaptation of the machine tool, but similar to any other kind of lubricant system that they may have as well. It's
very cool.
External, almost an add-on to a machine tool.
Nice. I've got a question here. Does Fusion have a greenhouse gas impact study using CO2 coolant? Is this something, because I guess we're worried about emissions of CO2 at a global level, but.
We do. Actually, this is some of Steve Skurlos's work academically, and we're actually putting together a case study for our own purposes, where we show what we're using, of course, is reclaimed CO2. So this is already CO2 that's been an emission from some other manufacturing process. Ammonia, as an example, generates quite a bit of CO2. So we are using reclaimed CO2, not new CO2. And so we've got these great studies that Steve has done, where we show a tremendous reduction of CO2 impact. We used an example project that we did with Lockheed Martin, where we showed an overall reduction of about 59% of total CO2 emissions based on savings in electricity, in, basically cutting tool, and, the processes involved in manufacturing these parts. And so we are net negative in terms of CO2, in terms of the total life cycle for, significantly for the operations that we help in manufacturing. So I don't have a case study that I could just send you because we're in the midst of putting it together, and it's very case specific to the part that's being made.
That's awesome. We got time for one more here, and I've only got about 30 seconds for it, but we have to go to our pitch party. But I'm going to make Ken Spencer live here, our good friend Ken Spencer from MCirc, and he's got a question or a comment. Ken, you're live with Chris.
Yes,
Hey,
Chris,
Ken.
so thank you. I got to talk to Steve Skurlos many times when I was first in MIR at Tech Transfer. What an amazing guy.
He sure is.
But there's another researcher at U of M, Kevin Pipe. Do you know him at all?
Pite? No, it doesn't ring a bell. P-I-T-E?
P-I-T-E. He is very involved in looking at specific cooling for specific organs in the body, and he has a successful FDA approved and application and startup for cooling the eye prior to doing some surgery there. He recently made a proposal to us for cooling the brain. Unfortunately, the brain cooling is pretty contraindicated at this point. It's dangerous. So, but he's really good at this, at what he does on there. So it just is another contact there. Steve may know him.
Sure. Well, thanks for the connection. That's the wonderful thing about this entrepreneurial community, is making these connections. So I appreciate that, Ken.
As always, Ken, thank you for those great comments. And yes, exactly like Chris said, that's what we love doing on this show, is just let's try to put people together. Just love it. Chris Gibbons, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing about fusion coolant systems and your experiences. You're a pillar in our community. You've done so much, and we just appreciate having your wisdom today.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for what you're doing with this program. This has been a bright spot in this COVID journey that we've all been on together. And I really appreciate what you're doing for the community. So thanks, Gene.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to see you. We'll look forward to the next time.
All right. Thank you.
Well, and with that, it is time for our pitch party. I need some music for the pitch party, but I don't have any music here for this. I've got John Sexton of LifeDrive with us. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gene. I'm about to share my screen.
That's fine. Go ahead and bring your screen up. We're going to put 10 minutes on the clock for you. As our audience knows, we don't ask questions afterwards because we're trying to give an equal playing field for all of the pitches. But we're going to let you go for it here in just a second, and I will send you a chat when you're at 8 minutes and then when you're at 9 minutes. So John Sexton of LifeDrive, take it away.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is John Sexton, and I'm the founder and CEO of LifeDrive, an assistive technology company providing a collection of solutions that allows for disabled individuals who have lost their independence to fully control their power wheelchairs through their eyes, voice, and caregiver. Our story started 7 years ago when my father, Sean, was diagnosed with ALS, a progressive neuromuscular disease that slowly takes away your ability to move, talk, and breathe. About 5 years ago, he was losing significant mobility in his hand, making it nearly impossible for him to safely and independently control his power wheelchair. We looked for all sorts of other alternate forms of control, but we didn't find anything that worked for him. So with both of our technical backgrounds, we decided to build one ourselves. And that's when iDrive, the first of our many solutions, was born. And my dad has been using it ever since. By the time I graduated from high school, we had developed iDrive, VoiceDrive, and CareDrive for my dad, as well as myself as a caregiver, my mom, and our other caregiver. And as I have gotten to Notre Dame as a rising junior electrical engineering major, I've assembled a team of talented undergraduate individuals with business, medical, and technical expertise to further advance the project. And we have a great team of mentors and advisors helping us along the way as well. Now let's talk about the problem. And to do this, I'd like you to do me a favor. For the next 30 seconds, don't move. Don't move your hands, don't move your arms, legs, feet, anything. If you have an itch, don't scratch it. I'd like you to experience, just for the next 30 seconds, what the 135,000 individuals who are diagnosed with a neurological disease annually face on a daily, nonstop basis. Not only do these diseases take away these individuals' independence and decrease their quality of life, but the assistive technology out there for these sorts of needs are either impermanent, invasive, or incomplete. And that's where we can all move together again with LifeDrive, our collection of assistive technologies that allow those who have lost their independence to fully control their power wheelchairs with their eyes, voice, or caregiver. As you can see here, our solution consists of a hardware device. It's a printed circuit board here, along with these are two of our apps. The top right is the eye controlled interface, and the bottom right is our caregiver controlled interface. And this allows the user not only to drive with their eyes, but also to adjust their seating position, adjust their speed, and even do something as simple as turning their chair on and off, all independently, all with these alternate forms of control. As for our competition, LifeDrive is an alternative drive method, but it's more than that. Not only do we allow the patient, as I said, to drive with their eyes or their voice or their caregiver, but you can adjust your seating position. You have an easy toggle between communicating and driving, something especially patients with ALS need as they lose their voice. We provide caregiver safety apps that pair with our eye controlled or voice controlled apps. We are a non-invasive device. We can allow you to adjust your speed. And again, we can allow for somebody to turn their chair on and off. As you see here, our competition is Ability Drive, which is another eye controlled solution, the Head Array, and Sip and Puff, which is provided by a wheelchair company. And the Head Array is a solution that you saw on the problem slide, allows you to move your head and press buttons to drive the chair, which is it's invasive. So if you've lost mobility in your neck, you can't really use it that well. And the Sip and Puff, which again, if you're losing your breathing, if you're losing your lung capacity, sipping and puffing in a tube to control the chair just won't work for you. Now, as for our market validation, we've done interviews with around 35 patients, medical professionals, and caregivers to get their feedback and to get their input as to our solution. And 33 out of 35 of those interviews those who we interviewed rated their interest in our product as a 9 out of 10 or higher, most of them being a 10 out of 10 enthusiastically. And 100% of individuals asked, whether they were patients, caregivers, or medical professionals, said they would either like to be involved in or do user testing, or they would willingly and excitedly recommend our product. One of these individuals who we interviewed stood out specifically, and his name was Eric, and he has familial ALS. So his mom had it, and one of his siblings had it, and I think his grandmother had it as well. And when we interviewed him, he said, quote, "If I get to a point where I'm completely paralyzed, having a solution like LifeDrive would be a deciding factor as to whether I'd want to live or die." And this truly embodies our mission with LifeDrive, as we are trying to improve this quality of life for all of these individuals with neuromuscular diseases so that they can keep fighting those diseases. As shown by Eric's quote, sometimes when you don't have the help necessary, it's very difficult to keep fighting. Now to get to the business and entrepreneurial side of things. So with our market size, our total available market, considering the number of individuals with applicable disabilities, around 419,000 people a year, our TAM is 1.13 billion. Our serviceable available market, which is the percentage of that population with very limited mobility, is 135,000. So our SAM is 364 million. Our SOM is 10% of our SAM at 36.4 million. And our beachhead of 20% of individuals who are diagnosed with ALS annually, which is 1,000 people, is 2.7 million, assuming we get 2,700 in revenue per unit. For our go-to-market strategy, we plan on talking to clinics, centers, medical professionals, patients, and caregivers in the ALS community first, since that is what I'm most familiar with, that's what the team is most familiar with, and that's what we know our product works best with right now. And so we'll get a stronghold in our beachhead market of ALS, and then we'll move on to follow-on markets of CP, MS, stroke, spinal cord injury, Parkinson's, all sorts of other neuromuscular diseases. And to get that advantage in these communities, we're going to work with nonprofits like IMALS and Team Gleason, and centers like Emory ALS Center and the University of Washington Medicine ALS Clinic. As for our business model, we're going to go through the insurance recommendation process. Essentially, we have 5 customers: the patient, the caregiver, the medical professional, assistive technology professional or physical therapist, the insurance provider, and the supplier company. So the way that a user will get our product is they will go with their caregiver to their medical professional, again, their assistive tech professional or physical therapist. They will explain their needs, and then that medical professional will write a recommendation to insurance. Once that recommendation is processed and approved, if it is approved, then the insurance company will contact a supplier company who we will have a contract with to get our product installed for the end user. So the issue with insurance is that they don't reimburse 100%. So as for our revenue per product, assuming we are asking for $6,000 per unit and insurance is 50% of that, they'll reimburse us. We'll get $3,000 in revenue per unit. And then assuming a 90-10 split with the supplier company, we'll get $2,700 in revenue per unit. And we would pair with New Motion and National Seating and Mobility as our supplier companies. As for our next steps, we are currently in the Race to Revenue program at the Idea Center. So we are aiming to begin our user testing of getting 3 user tests right now. And then we're also filing our provisional patent this summer. And then we'd also like to secure our initial advisory board that contains more medical advice along with that general business advice from our current advisors. In the fall, we're looking to do a decent amount of fundraising, specifically with non-dilutive capital, and we're going to figure out our regulatory pathway more specifically. In the spring, we're looking to do an accelerator program and file our utility patent. And by the summer next year, we are looking to tour 10 ALS and neuromuscular clinics and centers across the country to show our product. Now we want you to drive forward with us. So if you have any early stage medical device commercialization and funding advisors or people in the space that have great advice and are willing to help, please let me know. And if we were to win the $2,500 from the pitch party, we would use it on our provisional patent costs. It would cover a significant, if not all, portion of those provisional patent costs. And thank you for listening. My contact information is provided here if you have any further questions and would like to reach out. Thank you.
John, thank you so much. Great presentation. Like I said, we don't have questions from our judges afterwards. Let's see, is my video live? Are we back up, Steve?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. But we always ask one question of our presenters, and you mentioned at the outset. I also can mention that my dear grandmother lived the later part of her life with ALS, so we understand somewhat of the import. But tell us just a moment more. We always ask our presenters, what's the passion that keeps you doing this? Why are you doing this? Doing startups is not easy. What is your passion?
Yeah, so with this solution, when we were building this for my dad, especially with ALS patients, there's kind of a point in time in your disease where you have to really make a decision of whether you're going to keep fighting or you're going to kind of let the disease play out. And so that usually involves getting a trach. And so my dad was one of those people with ALS at the very beginning that really was against getting a trach. He was, when my time comes, my time comes. And as we progressed through the disease as a family, as he progressed, as an individual suffering through the disease, and as we built more of this type of technology for him, he saw a sustained quality of life that he didn't think was possible with what was out there already. And what motivates me to work as hard as I can on this every day is if I can provide that to just one other person, for them to get that trach, to have those extra consultations, to continue to fight, whether it's ALS, MS, spinal cord injury, any neuromuscular disease, or really any disease that's applicable. If I can make that happen for them with our product, then I will be fulfilled working on this project, because I know that how much of an impact that's had on me and my family personally.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you, John, for being here. Actually, we did just have a comment here, and I will pass this on just for communication purposes. One of our listeners said, have you considered applying, when it comes to patent stuff, a patent for humanity approach? I am actually myself not familiar with that, but something maybe we can follow up on, because it sounds like they may have programs at USPTO for things that are sort of that would be the equivalent of FDA saying this is a breakthrough device pathway or a humanitarian use exemption or something like that. But a great comment there from one of our listeners. So thank you for that, and thank you, John, for being with us. I hope you tune in on the 26th when or the last Friday of the month when our judges review all the things, and we'll have comments on everybody's. And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. I will be there.
Thanks for being here. And with that, we're just a couple minutes over. We're always trying to get out at 3 o'clock. We promise you we're going to keep doing better and better at that as we learn what broadcast media is all about. One more comment from our listener. He can contact the Educational Outreach Coordinator at the Detroit Satellite Office. Thank you for that. That's worth following up on, John, if you're still listening. And I will give about 30 seconds here. If anyone has an event that you want to announce or something happening in the local community, because we always want to leave room for that right before we close. And so if I see your hand go up, we'll give you a chance to announce that. But not seeing any and being over time today, we will go to next week, and I'll see you all next week on MedTech Crossroads. Thank you so much. Have a great day.